Researching the franchise industry can be a daunting task. There's so many options out there in which you can choose. Which brands wind up being in your top 3? This video is going to be the perfect guide. It's going to break down every step of the 7 steps in the discovery process for any brand. And it's going to tell you the right time to ask the right questions to the right audience, whether that be a franchisor or the franchisees or franchise owners in that system. It's going to give you so much confidence that you will be able to make the right choice for you and your family. Okay, first of all, I'd like to make sure that we have a good overview of what we call the 6 to 8 steps in every discovery process. Let's walk through them one at a time. In this case, we're going to take the number 1 FSO or franchise sales organization's 7-step discovery process. Step number 1 typically is just an intro call. This is where you're introduced to the franchise developer and you're just building rapport with him or her and vice versa for the first 45 to 60 minutes of that call. They're going to give you an overview of the brand at a much deeper level than, let's say, your franchise consultant, because they only have one brand to be a subject matter expert on, whereby myself and other colleagues of mine, we've got 600 plus brands to be an expert on. We're going to know more about that brand or those top 3 brands than you are initially, but by the end of that discovery process, you're going to know more than your franchise consultant knows about those 1 to 3 brands. Why? Because you're going to be on so many calls. You're going to learn those brands inside and out. So typically, the first step is the overview of the brand. They're going to give you their UVP, unique value proposition. What makes them different? What are their competitive advantages? They're going to give you the history on the brand, talk about the founder, how the founder got into that particular brand or business model. They're going to give you a great overview of that brand. Then step number 2 typically is what we call the UE module or the unit economics session. That would be week 2 or call number 2 typically. And in that call, they're going to talk about what is the average amount that it takes as a range, expressed as a range, for you to open your doors day 1. Startup capital, we call that, right? And that range is going to be a low number to a high number. Much of that depends on what market you're in. If you're in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, obviously your startup capital is probably going to be less than it would be in Chicago, New York, Miami, or San Francisco Bay Area for obvious reasons. And especially if brick and mortar is involved as opposed to a work from home model. They're also going to talk about operational cost or operational expenses. After you open your doors, on average, what are they seeing in their system in terms of the typical cost to get hopefully to break even sooner than later? Some brick and mortar models might take you 12 to 18 months to hit break even. Some you can do sooner. Much of that depends upon your ability, your aptitude, your leadership experience, your sales and marketing ability. Or if you're working a remote work from home franchise model, you might be able to hit break even in 3 to 6 months. Again, depending on those other experience levels that we just spoke about. On that call, the second call, they're also going to give you or talk about the FDD briefly, but they're going to send you that document. In fact, because we're regulated by the FTC or the Federal Trade Commission, they have to email that to you or they'll send you a hard copy, whatever is your preference. Either way, you're going to need to sign the date that you received that franchise disclosure document, also known popularly as the FDD. The FTC says that you need to be able to hold on to that document for at least 14 days. Why? Because it's a big document. It's pretty much written in easy to understand language, but you're going to want to hold on to that 14 days. I was speaking with a client of ours, candidate of ours last night in the Southern California market. And what she's doing, which is very smart, she's chunking it out. She's reading like 10 pages, not just reading, but studying. I encourage you to study that document. She's reading, studying about 10 to 15 pages per day of her FDD. And the idea is that within that 2-week period, she'll have it all not just read, but again studied. Highlight areas that you're going to have questions on. And typically the FDD, it's going to have 23 items in it. Okay, 23 items. And you can Google for what are the best or what are the most popular items to look at inside of that FDD. We'll deal with that with more specifics in a future video. Step number 3, this is weeks 3 to 4 typically. And in week 3, you're now going to get into the FDD at a much more detailed or granular level. This is where you're going to be able to ask all of the questions that you had highlighted from your previous reading and studying of that document. Again, a 200 to 300 page document, quite a bit of information there. Now, your franchise developer typically is going to be able to answer 100% of the questions that you have in that franchise disclosure document. However, what I still recommend is that you find a qualified franchise attorney in your area. You can just simply Google for best franchise attorney near me, and you'll find a plethora of them, quite a few in your area. If not, seek a expert's advice like myself, and we have a number of qualified franchise attorneys that we refer our candidates and clients to. Jump on a 30 to 45 minute consultation with that franchise attorney and go through those questions that you just didn't get full satisfaction on from the franchise developer, for example. Okay? Ask those questions to a franchise attorney. Anything related to the math of the franchise disclosure document, I would recommend that you speak with a franchise CPA in that regard. Again, you can Google for it, or you can get in touch with myself. I'm more than happy to refer you to plenty of franchise CPAs that can go through the math with you, or fractional CFOs that we refer to as well. Step number 4, this is going to be what we call confirmation day, or C-day invitations are going to go out between weeks 3 and 4 to you to let you know about the validation calls and the leadership calls that are going to be taking place between weeks 3 and 4. In my opinion, steps 3 and 4, validation calls, talking to existing franchisees or franchise owners within that system, and the executive team or the senior leadership team that's running that operation. Steps 3 to 4, weeks 3 to 4, most critical as critical success factors go to improve your probability of success within that system. Why do I say that? Well, that's going to give you an opportunity to ask the tough questions to the franchise owners. That's where you're going to start, with the franchise owners. Now, let me go over some of the questions that are must ask questions during the validation process. Franchise owners, you want to ask questions to the franchise owners like, did you have specific subject matter expertise in that particular industry before you made the decision to become a franchise owner in that system? Also, what are the support mechanisms or the type of support that you're getting from the franchisor? Very, very important question. You want to know not just that they received the initial training for you, your spouse, or your general manager, operations manager, but you also want to know what type of ongoing support are they giving you? Very critical. 2 different training modules, really, you want to be focused on. Initial training and ongoing training and support. You also want to find out, are you finding you're reaching an economy of scale, or you're getting the lowest cost possible on your supplies that you're purchasing through that system? Or would you get the same or comparable prices on your inventory if you just went down to the local Home Depot or Lowe's, right? You want to know that you're getting volume discounts. Also a very important question. Another important question for the franchise owner is, what were your forecasted expenses to open and what were the actual expenses? Could be 2 very different components, right? Most of the franchise owners that fail in a given system failed because they came in undercapitalized. They nor the franchisor really communicated properly about how much capital is needed to not just open day one, but also to get you to break even 6 to 18 months later, again, depending on brick and mortar or a remote model. Another very important question to ask the franchise owner is last year. Can you talk about your numbers for last year? Can you tell me gross sales? Can you tell me your EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization for last year? What were your actual numbers? Also, another important question for the franchise owner is what type of help or assistance is the franchise brand and their team giving you in terms of marketing support? Is it digital marketing? Is it print marketing? Or is it a hybrid? Or do you rely more on word of mouth, repeat, and referral business? Very important questions to ask and get underneath. Another important question is from a competitive advantage perspective. How competitive is your brand and you in your local market area? Another question, what kind of demand did you see when you first planned to open, when you wrote your business plan, and what kind of demand are you actually seeing or realizing for your particular business model in your local area? Now, all of these questions to a typical independent business owner, you'll never get answers to those. Why? Because they know you're going to come in and compete with them at some future point in time. That's one of the beautiful components to the franchise industry. You don't have to worry about that here. It's a real family-like, collegial-like environment. It's like a fraternity. They're going to be more than happy to share the answers to those questions with you. Why? Because they know that you are going to have some various intellectual capability and leadership skills and ways to go to market. And when you get into their system, they have paid it forward, right? They say, hey, this person's going to be a top 25%er like me, and we're going to be able to now share best practices. Happens all day, every day in the franchise industry. In fact, we've heard experiences of where some franchise owners have become so successful staying within the framework of the franchise agreement, but they've developed some of their own competitive intellectual property that they now share with corporate. Now corporate rolls it out at the nationwide level in a big annual meeting. Those are the most critical questions to ask a franchise owner in that system. Now, again, between weeks 3 and 4, now you're on executive or what we call leadership calls. Very important questions that you definitely want to find out from the executive team on those calls. For example, the very first question that I personally think is a critical success factor is, what is the background of that executive or those executives? Did they come from a similar or comparable industry? Or if they came from a different industry, what unique value proposition or competitive advantages do they bring to this new industry? In my opinion, this is the single most important factor of what we look for in the brands in which we represent in our 600 plus brand or portfolio. We want to know that we're working with senior leaders that understand how to go to market and how to offer new offerings that are going to continue to give competitive advantages. What type of negotiation skills do they employ when working with their vendors? Do they have a manufacturer that's backing them? Or in the case of Contractor Nation, for example, or Authority Brands, they're dealing with $3 to $5 billion worth of buying power. You know that no one else in terms of competitors in your market are going to be able to compete with you at your level with that kind of buying power behind you. So buying power, also very, very important. Another question to ask these executives on these leadership calls is, what type of track record do you have in the industry? How long have you been franchising? When did you open day one? And then when did you open and start to scale using the franchise model? Two very different answers you're going to get. How quickly did they start franchising after they opened? Did they really have nice systems and procedures and processes and methods in place before they started to scale using the franchise business model? Some franchise brands are what we call in Club 100. Club 100 basically means they've already hit 100 open locations across the country. Once they get 100 open locations, any franchisor, any founder, They're going to be making so much money. They're building wealth at such a fast pace. They now have the infrastructure in place, and they've reached an economy of scale that allows them to scale by introducing new technology, new offerings that they can offer in their business model. We really love to look for those brands with 100 open locations or more. That's good and bad. The downside to that is that some brands that have 100 to 300 open locations may mean that your territory has already been taken. So don't be afraid to talk about emerging brands or look at emerging brands. They're going to have somewhere between 10 to 50 open locations. Again, some of the same questions would apply to those in emerging brands. Many entrepreneurial types have a strong desire to start their own business. However, they're not sure of the exact way or ways to fund their franchise or their startup. And that's why I put together this comprehensive, innovative funding strategies guide. It's going to walk you through the most popular methods available today to fund your franchise or your startup. It's going to include explanations on the SBA Express, the SBA 7A, home equity lines of credit, unsecured funding, portfolio loans, 401k rollovers, and a lot more. Download your free copy by clicking in the link in the description below. Let's talk about the financial health of a franchise brand on those executive calls. You want to find out what is the typical franchise fee that's going to be charged, right? Typically, that's going to range somewhere between $40,000 on the low. I've seen as high as $65,000 on the high for just your franchise fee. And then in addition to that franchise fee, you're going to pay a royalty, typically 6 to 8% against revenues, actual revenues, and or profit. And that's going to depend on what's in the franchise agreement. Sometimes those royalties of 6 to 8% are a sliding scale, meaning as your revenues or trajectory of revenues go up, you're going to pay a smaller percentage on royalties. Something very important to ask. Some franchise business models will also charge what's called a technology fee. You may pay another 1% in terms of a technology fee, or in some cases, it's a flat fee. Also, in some cases, you're going to pay an advertising fee. That advertising fee typically can be 1 to 3%. So if you're looking at 6 to 8% on royalties, 1 to 2% on advertising, and maybe 1% on technology, you're probably looking at about 10 to 12% overall for your fees. Now, there are some pros and cons to those fees, right? The biggest pro is that you're getting a lot for those fees. And again, that's the place to ask is on those leadership calls. What value do you folks bring to us as franchisees for the fees in which we're investing? Of course, the downside is that you're investing the fees. You do have some ongoing fees, but most successful franchisees will tell you they're happy to pay that 10 to 12% overall. Why? Because if they started the business from scratch as an independent, they know that they're going to need assistance in coming up with new offerings in R&D, research and development. They know that they're going to have to come up with new technology. Who's going to be leading the charge and making sure that they stay ahead of the curve? Let's say AI or artificial intelligence or the latest software that's being used within the industry. Again, those 10 to 12% fees are well worth investment, but only if you are partnering informally, partnering with the right franchise brands and the right leadership teams. Another good question to ask on that leadership call is, what type of training and development do you offer? Do you offer ongoing training, or is it just the initial training that you focus on? And if so, what does that look like? Another good question on those leadership calls, what type of assistance do you offer your franchisees for marketing? Again, is it just digital marketing? Is it print? Do you help with social media marketing? Do you give us a micro website that's a knockoff of the corporate site, or do we get to invent our own website with your assistance? Many franchise business models will say, here is the playbook for marketing. You execute on it. Some will say, here's the playbook. We're going to help you execute on that playbook from a digital marketing and print marketing perspective. Some brands, and I love these brands, they say, we're going to do it for you, DFY, done for you marketing, where they have an entire marketing team, and the marketing team is going to take the lead, of course, with your input, where you're going to be meeting with them, let's say weekly, and discussing the advertising and marketing plan, where those dollars are going to be invested from the national budget versus your local budget, or is it going to be a hybrid between the local and the national budget? Another good question for these executives: territories. Most brands are going to offer exclusivity in terms of your territory. That territory is going to consist, typically, it's going to range somewhere between 200,000 to 300,000 population. But you also are going to want to know, are they also looking at demographics, not just population size, but also the quality of that population? For example, if you're in a home service brand, are they going to look at how many single family dwellings are in your territory, consisting of multiple zip codes or multiple communities or cities? Or are they just going to give you an aggregate total number of households, which might include apartments or some low-income neighborhoods that are undesirable in your market? Very, very important question to ask these leaders on the leadership calls. Let's talk about restrictions and obligations. Normally, restrictions and obligations are going to be dealt with inside of the franchise agreement itself. So remember, we're dealing with two pretty big documents here. The franchise disclosure document, FDD, that typically can run from 150 to 300 pages. I've seen some that big. Again, franchise attorney, whether you find them or you consult with me for a referral. And B, the franchise agreement. The franchise agreement typically can be a large document as well. I've seen them 50 pages to 100 pages. Again, a franchise attorney or consult with someone, with a consultant like myself. Get into that franchise agreement. Inside of that franchise agreement, they're going to talk about the restrictions and look at it like a football field or baseball diamond or basketball court. There's a breadth and depth of latitude and flexibility that they give every franchisee. You want to always play in the boundaries or in the middle of the field. But of course, you've got the sidelines that you can work as well, as we say in sports. But that's a very critical factor as well. On those leadership calls, make sure you find out, what are the boundaries? What are the restrictions? What's the latitude? For example, I'm working with an executive vice president of a very, very large ad agency as we speak in the New York, New Jersey area. His question to me, and we sent it over to the franchise developer, can he run his own advertising program? He knows with the team that he's already got on the field, he can do a far better job at a lower cost per advertising dollar invested. His ROAS, or return on ad spend, is going to be even higher if he can run his own advertising and marketing. Now, my hunch is that the franchisor or the executive leadership team is going to say, no, you can't run it 100% on your own. However, we're more than happy to work with you and be in concert with you to make sure that if you're executing on your own advertising and marketing plan, that you're staying within the boundaries or the guidelines of our franchise agreement. That's where I think that one's going to fall. You also want to ask the question, what about supplies and inventory? If you're dealing, again, in the home services space, are you allowed to go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy product offline? Let's say it's an emergency case. It's going to take too long to get in that particular inventory item or product from corporate's buying source. Are you allowed to do that? And if so, to what extent can you do that? All of that you want to make sure is spelled out clearly in the franchise agreement, and have the leadership team answer that question for you. Let's talk about litigation. No franchisor brings on a franchisee and invests tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands over years, just to wind up in litigation with them and have a negative, tarnished reputation in the industry throughout the country. No one enters an agreement like that, either the franchisor nor the franchisee. However, you want to know up front, as the franchisee or potential franchisee, what kind of litigation has this brand or business model been involved in, if any? And you also want to know about individual executives on that team. What type of litigation have they been in? Now, Item number 2 of the 23 items in the franchise disclosure document, or the FDD, it's going to spell out the leadership team, and it's going to give you their background, their history, and it's going to match up or sync up in that leadership validation calls or sessions that you're going to be on. So that's a good place to analyze the leadership team in print. This is what they've disclosed to the FTC, and that's all transparently printed in that franchise disclosure document. Now, item number 3, very good information in that one as well, because in that one, it's going to talk about how many of these executives or the brand have actually been in court. And if so, what type of outcome? Were they at fault or not? Now, based on my experience, most litigation happens because certain franchisees do not pay the royalties. We have a case right now where one company came in and acquired about 150 franchisees in this under this one brand or umbrella. When they did an audit of all the books, they found that about 20% of their franchisees under the old owners were not paying their rightful fair share of royalties. You know, some of these folks were running 2 sets of books, one set of books for the IRS and the other set of books was for the franchisor. That's what they paid, their royalties on. Some had money off the books, income off the books that were never accounted for. Hence, they didn't have to pay that 6 to 8% royalty. Well, they gave them 3 months to clean it up and to start paying the 6 to 8%. And those that refused to do that, guess what? The franchisor said, you no longer have a valid franchise agreement. You can no longer operate under our brand, our trademarks, copyrights, our go-to systems, methods, and procedures. So they severed their relationship with those. So just because you see litigation in that item 3 does not mean that they're bad people. So you want to dig a little deeper depending on what you find in that item 3 or litigation section. Third question you want to ask also is bankruptcy. How many of these senior leaders have actually filed for bankruptcy protection? That's a separate item, and typically you see that in item number 4 in the FDD. Okay, let's talk about step number 5 in that 7-step discovery process. Step number 5 is going to be what we call confirmation day, or C day as we call it in the industry. After you've gone through those first 4 steps, you're now assuming that the leadership team likes you and you like the leadership team. They're going to send you an invitation to what we call confirmation day. You're going to fly out to their corporate offices, wherever that may be. And during that process, you're going to meet the entire team. The entire team that's going to be backing you, the entire team that's going to be supporting you, the entire team that's going to be cheerleading you. And that's a very important meeting for obvious reasons. It's one thing to talk to folks over the telephone, another on Zoom or Microsoft Teams video calls, but you get a totally different dynamic when you meet them in person, for good or for bad, right? The chemistry. And just because the brand is fantastic, just because the senior leadership team is fantastic, you want that chemistry. You want good symmetry in terms of the rapport with you and the entire team, including the senior leadership team. And you will only know that when you attend career day or confirmation day, right? You could also call it a career day. Now, assuming that things go well on your C day or confirmation day, both directions, guess what? They now make you an offer to become a franchisee. Franchisors, they don't sell franchises, but they award franchises. They're absolutely looking for the right fit. And that's very important. And again, the initial client questionnaire that you filled out, the Zorco assessment, similar to Myers-Briggs or DISC profile personality assessments, all of those things are what an experienced, seasoned franchise consultant like myself look for. We dig deep into those documents and your answers in those 2 documents to match you with the brand so that when you get to confirmation day, there's a good fit there for both you and the senior leadership team. Now they award you the franchise. What does that sound like or look like? Well, they're going to email you the franchise agreement or a hard copy. They're going to mail it to you. and it's going to be customized with everything that you've talked about up to that point. Is the franchise agreement negotiable? For the most part, no. I'm totally transparent with our candidates and clients. Don't think that you're going to hire a franchise attorney and then they're going to go in and they're going to negotiate or litigate all 23 of the items in the FDD and the franchise agreement. The franchise agreement is always going to favor the franchisor. That would be like McDonald's awarding a franchise to a franchisee, and then the franchisee comes in and thinks that they're going to change McDonald's. No, that franchisee swimming in McDonald's pool, not the other way around. And again, that's a great analogy, I believe, to describe all franchisor brands. They're growing and scaling and are very successful because of their proven systems, processes, and methods and procedures, and their marketing, their go-to-market know-how, and their ability to compete at a high level by partnering with strong franchisees like yourself. Again, you're going to have days to review that franchise agreement. It's going to vary depending on the franchise brands, but you're typically going to have 3 to 10 days to analyze it, go through it. Again, I would recommend getting a franchise attorney involved to answer any more technical questions that the franchise developer can't answer for you to your satisfaction, or getting in touch with a franchise consultant like myself for referral to that franchise attorney and or franchise CPA, depending on what type of questions you're going to ask, right? Now, that validation and meeting with the senior leadership team, all of those things then lead you to signing your franchise agreement. And now there's a welcome call, typically with the CEO, president, founder of the company, or someone at a very, very high level. Welcome call, and you're off to the races with your initial training. And then your plan, your business plan, of course, all of that has already been fleshed out. And then you have your grand opening target date, 30, 60, 90 days out. And you open, and as they say, if everyone's done what they're supposed to do, the rest is history. So welcome to your first franchise ownership. I know we've covered a lot of ground in this video today, and there's a lot more that you need to know about the franchise industry. That's why we created a series of videos that goes deeper into each one of these topics. Click on the video that's on the screen right now, and I'll see you there.